Coming up tonight, is Grand Bahama the linchpin to economic recovery for the Bahamas? Some startling information to be released ahead. Also, the National Security Minister says in the wake of all of these police-involved shootings, government is looking to improve the efficiency of the coroner's court. And Over the Hill initiative, government pushing the plan in Parliament. Meantime, businesses are still in the dark. How will gentrification be avoided? Three big issues we take on tonight with my special expert contributor. Beyond the Headline starts now. An economy that has struggled for survival over the past decade could actually hold the key to economic recovery in the Bahamas. Good evening, everyone. I'm Clint Watson, and welcome to the show tonight. Well, when you say the name Grand Bahama, it has for years been associated with the terms sluggish, dying, depressed, and suffering. But one expert says it could actually be the key to serious economic activity for the country if dealt with effectively. Joining me tonight is Beyond the Headlines contributor from Grand Bahama, C. Alan Johnson. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Clint, for having me once again.
When we hear Grand Bahama, people just tend to freeze up and say, oh Lord, Grand Bahama, because it seems that almost now forever that this island has struggled. A once prominent island, an island that was known for as the Magic City, that had so much going on for it, went into recession thanks to hurricanes and the closure of hotels and stuff, went into depression and struggled, is struggling still to come out. Yet you believe that it could be the linchpin for economic bounce back and recovery for the entire country.
Absolutely. Grand Bahama is a unique environment. And they use the word ecosystem. Ecosystem is a term for business development. And when you look at Grand Bahama has it has 2.5 airports in West End. It has an airport, the major airport in Freeport, and it also has an old Army base airport in East Grand Bahama. Correct. I think one of the third largest airport in the region. It also has the Deepwater Harbor, one of the third largest in the world. Grand Bahama also has a digital ecosystem that allows it to become, as the Prime Minister promotes, the Silicon Valley of the Bahamas. Grand Bahama also in West Grand Bahama, where we had the Oban issue, also is one of the world's largest underwater cave, the second largest freshwater supply in the Caribbean. The second largest next to Andros is the first largest, the second largest Copus environment, second largest reef environment in the Bahamas, the second largest, and this is the Caribbean also, even larger than the whole state of Florida, the whole United States. And so when you begin to look at these unique things.
In other words, everything that may be unique to another island only, you can find all of it in Grand Bahama.
All of it in one location. And so you have the geopolitical location 60 miles off the state of Florida, of the United States. The Grand Bahama also is in the pathway of the major shipping lane for 80% of the commerce that happens in the United States.
Wow.
And so we basically are poised for growth.
What has happened? Why are we not seeing that?
Leadership. One has to question, what has happened in Grand Bahama? Is it a deliberate act of sabotage?
Really?
Really, because clearly, like you mentioned, the Hutchison Whampoa. Hutchison Whampoa is one of the largest hospitality companies in the world. It's one of the largest investors in telecommunications in the world. It's one of the largest investors in shipping in the world. And all of these things are unique to Grand Bahama. So how do you have a multi-billion-dollar company that totally understands the environment that is there, but we've had no major development?
Wow.
And so you have to begin to question leadership in the Grand Bahama Port Authority, in Hutchison Whampoa, as well as in government. You have to take two positions. Either they are totally ignorant of what Grand Bahama is, and I beg to differ, or that they have refused to do what is necessary for the economic revival.
So this is intentional.
And it's my considered opinion, what has happened to Grand Bahama is intentional. And for me, it actually goes all the way back to 1990, when the government of the Bahamas, when people must read the Hawksbill Agreement.
Correct.
In August of 1990, it's supposed the Grand Bahama Port Authority is supposed to fall away, and a municipal government is supposed to be formed. That municipal government, it's supposed to be responsible for keeping and retaining the taxes in Freeport, which would not go to the central government. And that amount is about $150 to $300 million a year. So imagine a local government facility in Freeport with their own $300 million a year budget and ability, following the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, to basically control its own environment and development. When you begin to exercise that, and this is where you have the substitute of local government was given to us, was to subdue this happening when they did this so-called delayed implementation. And so this was to subdue it happening, because once you give an autonomous governance to Freeport, you almost automatically must extend it to all the other islands, because you can't create a law for Freeport and not create one that's effective for everything else. And it has nothing to do with modification of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. It's actually keeping in line with the intent of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. When you hear about the so-called extension of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, no such thing has ever occurred. What they have done is delayed the implementation of the tax regime, which would force them to create a real local government, which is called a municipal government. That municipal government would then take control for the economic development and revitalization of Freeport, which then gives power to a group of people or a wider people. Just use an example. If I was, say, mayor of Freeport, I would immediately extend my influence to East and West Grand Bahama.
Of course.
Giving them their hospitals, schools, and whatever.
But the port doesn't do that. The port likes to keep its power and its control of authorizing what you can and cannot do and keeping it limited to the city of Freeport.
The Port Authority never did that. The Port Authority is nothing but a shell. If you go back to September of 1969, and this thing called the Bengay Agreement. This is why we call it, with Greg Moss and myself, call it the Grand Deception. In 1969, the Grand Bahama Port Authority in the Bengay Agreement surrendered all that power. If you come to Freeport and you need a business license, you don't go to the port, you go to government.
Correct.
If you need a bonded license, as they call it, you don't go to the port.
You go to government.
If you need anything, you go to government. The only thing you go to the Port Authority for is to pay them a fee.
So are you saying then that the port is operating under the disguise of having power when it actually does not have authority and power?
It does not. The Bengay Agreement stripped them of that. The Bengay Agreement was when, after the Ben or Break speech, the investors became very concerned and they wanted to dispose of their shares. And this is how we came with the 7.5% of the Grand Bahama Port Authority. You know, the government owns 7.5%. To date, no one has told us where the 7.5% is paid, where the dividends from that 7.5% has never showed up into the treasury.
Where does it go?
No one knows. And people like myself have been asking, where does the 7.5% go? But the Bengay Agreement surrendered all the power and authority of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement back to government. And
so if
in the late evening of September, I think it's September 15th of 1969, a late 7 p.m. session, they came up with this concept called the Bengay Agreement that surrendered all the authority back to government.
Why does government know about this? And if they know about this, why are they acting as though they have no authority? I'm going to let you answer that when we come back after the break. You're watching Behind the Headlines. You're hearing an exclusive interview with C. Alan Johnson on Grand Bahama and who actually has the control and power there. You'll be surprised to find out. We're back after this. Welcome back. We're having a candid discussion with my contributor from Grand Bahama, C. Alan Johnson, about the Grand Bahamian economy and how it could really, if it's given the wings, could fly. We were talking about the Port Authority and this perception that they control and run everything and the government has to go through them to make things happen. And you're telling me that's all been a perception and a lie from years ago. What do you mean?
Well, essentially, since the Bengay Agreement surrendered its authority back to the government, and the government basically had them act as a proxy between them. And so when you, other than paying a fee to the Grand Bahama Port Authority, they give you no value, absolutely no value. Everything else comes from government. Policing, school, fire, everything. The government build the roads, the government build the schools. It's supposed to be in cooperation. And we give them a tax break of $150 million a year every single year. Literally give them $2 to $3 million a week in tax concessions to run Freeport.
So if government is aware of this agreement, and the Port Authority has this, real facade of power, but no real power, Why have they allowed us to continue for so long?
That's the question that we need to have answered, because there's some underlying things. For instance, and which is a very important document to get a hold of, would be the Bengay Agreement. Not is to read the Bengay Agreement, but this McKinsey report that came out that the government, in fact, this administration, current administration, for years screamed that it should be released to the public. They've been in for 15, 16 months. They have refused to release this.
What's in this McKinsey report?
This McKinsey report tells you the real state of the Grand Bahama economy and why it may need to be diversified, and as well as the things that is necessary for its economic development and revitalization. And it may even have recommended that the tax concessions not be continued. But it also points to the point, my understanding, it points to the fact that we don't have a land registry in Freeport. And nobody knows who owns any of the land. If I wanted to see a major tract of land I wanted to develop, I must go beg and borrow and demand access, which you do not have access.
There's no red land registry in Freeport?
In the Port Authority, not in the government. There's no government land registry in Freeport, so nobody knows who owns.
So who owns what?
Nobody does. Nobody knows. And that's where, again, the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, when you move to allowing what the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement called for to happen, it would have created a land registry, because you could not collect real property tax unless you know who owns it. This is why they keep delaying the implementation of this tax.
Because then we would all be aware of who
owns what.
And I think we'd be quite surprised who owns what in Grand Bahama.
Yes, you would. You would be surprised of who owned hundreds, if not thousands, of acres within previous members of parliament, international people, whatever else, who owns Freeport.
And interestingly, you were telling me that even the attorneys for the port have a serious trace to politics.
Absolutely. You have former prime ministers who have served as consul to the Grand Bahama Port Authority, going back from our first premier and prime minister. It was well known concerning Sir Stafford Sands and their involvement in it. You had Sir Lyndon Pinlin, Wallace Whitfield, and Hubert Ingram, and all the rest of them. There's an intimacy concerning leadership of our country with the Grand Bahama Port Authority that, for me personally, I find uncomfortable, knowing the fact of this information that is there and the level of protectionism that is given to the information in spite of what is in the public domain.
So you're telling me, see, Alan, that all of this talk every year, every 5 years, we hear of political parties about we're going to revive Grand Bahama. We're going to get Grand Bahama back to where it needs to be. We're going to get people to work. We're going to work with the port. We're going to try and renegotiate this agreement, Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, which is holding down Grand Bahama and bring liberation. All of that is just smokescreen and a show.
The the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement is a name. It's actually a law in the Bahamas, and you cannot change the law unless you strike it down. So the minute you go to change the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, it strikes it down. But the law calls for certain things to happen, which they delay the implementation of that. That's called the delayed implementation. They moved the date from 1990 right up now to 2024 or something of that sort.
Correct.
So essentially, but it's a law that can be fixed. The problem is that you have lip service, and what is necessary for the economic development of Grand Bahama is to understand this McKinsey report, is to look at the Bengay Agreement, and the latest thing to that is to find this digital report on Grand Bahama. Because the digital report will also give you the ecosystem and what is necessary to happen for the Silicon Valley to happen in Grand Bahama. Even for the promise made by this administration during the campaign of ecotourism in East Grand Bahama, of a digital and industry in Freeport, and a cultural and heritage in West Grand Bahama, cannot happen unless Freeport serves as that linchpin. But when you begin to look at the entire Bahamas, I challenge any economist or anyone to show me an economic plan where Grand Bahama is not the central focus attention of this so-called revitalization. There can be no more development in the Bahamas. In New Providence, no more development can happen on New Providence. In any other island, it would take hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, of infrastructure. All of that is already in place for Grand Bahama. So the only thing that has to happen now is for laws and things to happen, and some to even fall away, for the economic development to happen. The question then becomes, but you heard for the whole campaign, Grand Bahama is the linchpin, Grand Bahama is the linchpin, but there's been nothing happen. And when information is requested of what to happen on Grand Bahama, you hear this talk about a hotel and everything else. Look at the environment with the trade wars that's going on right now. Grand Bahama is the man in the middle. You could land stuff in Grand Bahama without going to America to pay the tariffs and go to the rest of the Caribbean. You could land stuff in America, in the Bahamas. It's a perfect ideal location for an explosion. Grand Bahama has the digital infrastructure for the fourth industrial revolution. No other country in the Caribbean has the digital infrastructure and preparedness for Grand Bahama. If you look at the Bahamas as a digitally prepared country, it'll be #1 in the world. If you treated Grand Bahama as a country, it'll be the second most prepared country in the world. And that's for digitally. The same thing in East Grand Bahama. You have hundreds of thousands of prime land that when you meet the ecosystem, the reefs, everything. So you talk about ecotourism, bed and breakfast, hundreds if not thousands of bed and breakfast in the most pristine environment. Some of the longest underwater caves in the world, some of the largest coppice in the world, the second largest group of mangrove, even larger than the whole state, the whole. In
not even codes. If I will throw this right here with Oban.
No, Oban. See, for me, and I put to you that when you read the Oban deal, page 23G, you will see that in there they had a right to basically acquire any neighboring land, which is 100% of the Crown land. And so when you look at that deal, for me, Oban was never an oil deal. It was a land grab.
Wow.
And when
we missed the whole thing. It wasn't about the oil refinery at all.
It wasn't. So because the oil refinery simply would have went away, but the land grab would still remain. And it simply says that any land in the area of Oban Industries had first right of refusal for 99 years if you wanted to lease.
99 years.
90 years. If you wanted to lease, if you wanted to buy, you wanted to sell, even privately. They had the first right of refusal, and they had 6 months to tell you whether or not they want to buy, and 6 months to actually close on the deal. So if I decide I had a piece of land, I want to sell it, I had to sit there for a year for them to decide whether they want it or not. And it gives them 100% control of East Grand Bahama and eventually Freeport, because eventually Freeport is also Crown land in some areas. So that Crown land touches this Crown land. So when that lease expires, they would have first right of refusal for Freeport.
There's a lot going on with this Grand Bahama thing, and I'm glad you shed some light. There's so much more. We just don't have time to go into all of it. But there's so much more about Grand Bahama, and that's why people in Grand Bahama need to be asking the right questions to government, because there's more than meets the eye. There's some other big stories making headlines. When we come back, we're going to take a crack at those and talk about those when we come up before we close. Stay close to watching Beyond the Headlines. Welcome back. My guest is contributor C. Allen Johnson from Grand Bahama. We're talking about Grand Bahama the whole time. It's been amazing hearing the revelation and the information and his perspective on what's happening on that island. We want to move some of the other big topics happening in the news today. Obviously, the Minister of National Security tonight came on the news and talked about the fact that there's been 8 police-involved shootings so far this year. That's pretty high.
It concerns me whether these are extrajudicial something involving, because it's a huge jump in police shootings, and then we have this concept of that no tolerance, low tolerance, or zero tolerance. And the fact is that we talk even again, I'm a technology consultant, about the ability to basically have authenticate. We've been talking for years about technology. The police are saying they're going to test cameras. You don't have to test cameras. It's been proven around the world that these cameras work. But my concern is the fact that there's been no real public release of exactly what has happened.
And the family was on last night talking about it with the last one with D'Angelo Evans.
Yes.
They were saying no one has said anything. You know, you've shot our loved one reportedly 18 times for a crime that people are saying he was not the one, and all the witnesses and sources that he was not the one. Yet the police have not said anything to this family about this investigation, only saying, oh, it's in the hands of the court now, we can't get involved. Shouldn't they have given some kind of dialogue with this family?
No, I think they should have given some dialogue, but even for the coroner court, somehow, we talk about laws, and we can very easily change laws in 10 minutes. We did it for turtles, we did it for dogs, we did it for sharks, we can do it for behemoths. And clearly we can just adjust whatever laws that is necessary to bring relief and give some power to the coronary court. More so for the fact that the police is where we're supposed to be placing our trust. Yeah. And so there has to be some change to be able to provide information, comfort, or even expedite the investigation into exactly what has happened, call witnesses, call whatever else, and give them an update. The fact that there's no communication has come back to us on any of these 8 shootings is a concern for myself and others, because it just basically becomes scary when the police could just arbitrarily make a decision that they may just take the decision to take action where we are feeling that there's a threat or something else and there's no accountability or repercussions for actions taken.
We've got about 2.5 minutes left. Let's move on to the Over the Hill initiative. Prime Minister in Parliament today, they're debating this bill that's supposed to bring relief to the Over the Hill communities, provide opportunities and tax relief for the businesses in Over the Hill. How do we avoid gentrification? And what that means is all of these other successful businesses trying to move into the area now and take advantage of all of these tax concessions. Can we avoid that happening? Yesterday, we went into the Over the Hill community talking to the small businesses. Many of them didn't even understand what was available to them.
Basically, this is a gentrification bill. There's nothing else to call it. Without an economic regime attached, and no one can explain how do you change, because what you do is it's impossible to increase the value of homes in that area without increasing the cost of living. So automatically, the individuals who live there, whether they're renting or whatever else, will have to find someplace else. The government have not released any economic attachment. How are you going to empower people? How are we going to really transfer the home ownership? What you have is a book of ideas, but there's no strategy attached, no medium, short, or long-term goal. There's no entrepreneurship, business development. $5 million is a joke for economic development of individuals. What are you going to say? You're going to give a couple people some money when 90% failure is expected within 5 years? So again, this is a gentrification bill, and you will see the connection of Bay Street as they develop that, move into this Over the Hill, where you have a continuation of a whole economic zone, and Bahamas will be pushed further south. And so it's important for them to come and bring a business plan, an economic development plan that can show where wealth will increase. Because I own some properties there and I'm going to spend some monies. And there's no way I'm going to spend $150,000 to $200,000 without expecting that I have to be able to pay the bank. So now who will be able to pay for those properties except more wealthy individuals? So this is, no question, a gentrification bill unless the government comes and explains the finer details to tell us how, when, and where it will occur.
Wow. C. Alan Johnson, thank you for joining me tonight on the show. I appreciate your wisdom. You've shared a lot, and it gives us a lot of food for thought. Thanks again.
Thanks again.
And that's our show tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow night. On behalf of all of us, I'm Clint Watson saying good night.